what happens in third world countries is when you disagree with someone politically, you go after them through prosecutor's office. You basically, imprison your political opponents. And unfortunately, I think we're starting to see a little bit of that here. And I think that's why the Supreme Court came in and basically said, look, if it's an official act of the president, which the Constitution says he or she can do, then you can't prosecute them for it, because if you do, you're going to end up down this rabbit hole where every time there's a change in administration, a bunch of people, not just the president, but aides, staff, are going to end up being arrested and prosecuted, and it's going to deter anyone from wanting to serve in government, except for people on the far left that control all the agencies that are going to end up prosecuting people.
Will Trump be the king of America? The king of America. Well, that's what the left thinks. The left doesn't think you even have a right to make your own decision. This radical new left believes that they should be making the decisions for you, because we're just dumb Americans. Obviously, the Supreme Court has seen something different. They are going by the Constitution and by rule of law, and they have interpreted that law exactly as it needs to be. And we have seen that in ruling after ruling after ruling these past several weeks and these past few months. If you heard any hot air coming from the radical left over the last couple of days, that is exactly what it is. It's just hot air. They're actually hyperventilating at the idea that Trump could use the power of the DOJ to, guess what, go after political opponents. You know why they are freaking out like this? You know why they are freaking out about the idea that Trump would go after political opponents? It's because they're the ones that have been doing it. They are the ones that have weaponized our justice system to target political opponents. They are the ones that sent an armada of FBI agents to surround Roger Stone's home. Remember that? To target him and anyone who supported Trump. They used him as an example because they had already called CNN, who was just waiting by Roger Stone's house for that entire scene to unfold. An elderly man and his wife, they're surrounding his house. And I bring him up as an example of many, because we've seen how they weaponize the system against President Trump with a waste of all of taxpayer dollars and court trial after court trial after court trial in search of a crime, crimes that they can't even explain themselves. Here is Rachel Maddow laying out her case. It's insane. Listen to this.
And this is a president who has activated pro-Trump paramilitary groups that, wear insignia and T-shirts and hold placards celebrating literally right-wing death squads, right? This is a president who has talked about absolutely using the Justice Department to go after his rivals. This explicitly immunizes anything the president wants to do through the Justice Department, but all but explicitly justifies anything the president wants to do, full stop, to anyone. And that is as serious as it gets.
Oh my gosh. What's as serious as it gets is Rachel Maddow lying through her teeth, but believing every lie that she's uttering. It's complete derangement syndrome. This is Trump derangement syndrome. And it also is terrifying because it shows us that for decades now, this seed has been planted. This communist, radical, Marxist seed has been planted, and it's spreading. It's spreading across our country. It has infected our youth. And the only way to rid ourselves of this horrific virus is to continue telling the truth and to continue exposing this radical left. This radical left, the same radical left, the radical left that elected prosecutors to go get Trump, use the Steele dossier, Christopher Steele's dossier, to accuse Trump of Russia collusion with the help of a very complicit U.S. intelligence apparatus that should have never been allowed to even make any moves at all on a duly elected president of these United States. And when they did, they should have been prosecuted, but they were not. They illegally wiretapped his phone. They went after Carter Page. Do you guys remember Carter Page? Do you remember Peter Strzok and Lisa Page? Do you remember those two, the lovebirds? Do you remember how they operated together to target President Trump with the FBI? Do you remember Clapper and Comey and Brennan debriefing President Trump in January 2017 on the dossier, on the most salacious parts of the dossier? So what they could do is go directly to Jake Tapper at CNN and then have him and BuzzFeed break the story on a lie. This is the same apparatus, the same group that is covering up and did cover up for Hunter Biden's laptop. 51 US intelligence officials totally getting involved in an election, yes, by sending a letter stating that the laptop from hell, right, was Russian disinformation when it wasn't. These are the same people that allowed the FBI to go into Mar-a-Lago, not only illegally wiretap, but they raided Melania Trump, the first lady's closet. They went through all of her things. And now these are the people that are concerned that Trump could now use the DOJ against them. These are the same people that continue every single day through their friends in the media and through their own Department of Justice, which is the FBI, to try to threaten people like me and others in a very underhanded way that support an America First agenda, who believe in MAGA or who say they support President Trump. This is not the America that my father fought for in World War II. Neither is it the America that my husband fought for in Afghanistan and Iraq and all over the world when he was a special operator and putting his life on the line every single day for this country. This is not the America that is written in our Constitution. This is some kind of upside down America, and I'm allowed to say it. Because guess what? There is a Constitution that allows me to speak my mind. I'm not inciting violence. I am telling you that we have a bureaucracy that is out of control. One that is trying to take away your voice and your rights as Americans to hold them accountable. They are the power base. They want to obtain and hold on to that power at any cost. And they do not care about this country, and they do not care about you, the American people. They do not. But guess what? We are not going to stop fighting them. To break all this down, I have former Attorney General Mark Brnovich on the show today to explain what these SCOTUS rulings mean. And we're going to dive not only deep into that and take that apart, but we're going to talk about the actual real, very real threats that the Department of Justice and others within the intelligence community have actually made against Americans who are standing up to this. The very real discussions that people like John Brennan, former head of the CIA, and Clapper and others have had to target Americans who are MAGA Americans, Make America Great Again Americans, or people who attend Latin Mass, or those who truly believe in the Constitution and believe that a government that is trampling on that Constitution should probably be voted out of office. How all of these people and so many more have now become targets of the FBI, when instead it should be the FBI and our intelligence apparatus should be focused more on targeting the enemies of our nation and the enemies of our state, not those that are trying to make this country better. But first, Goldco. Did you know that the experts call gold the everything hedge? Gold goes far beyond hedging against inflation or the stock market, and it gives you peace of mind that your money is invested in something with real tangible value. That's why gold just hit another record high, and central banks keep buying gold at a record pace. That's also why I've partnered with the top-rated company, Goldco. I want you to listen to their current offer. You can get 10% instant match in free bonus silver with a qualified account. Plus, visit Sara, S-A-R-A, likesgold.com to qualify for a free 1 ounce silver Ronald Reagan coin. Join the thousands of people who called Goldco the #1 rated gold company, and do what I tell you to do all the time: diversify. If you don't believe me, just do a little bit of investigating yourself. Check it out for yourself and realize that diversifying your funds are the best thing that you can do for you and your family. Today, Goldco is offering up to 10% instant match in free bonus silver with a qualified account. Plus, visit sarah.com to qualify for a free 1-ounce silver Ronald Reagan coin. That's sarah.com or call 855-823-GOLD. sarahlikesgold.com or call 855-823-GOLD. Very happy to have my friend, former Attorney General of the great state of Arizona, Mark Brnovich, on the story today here with me, talking about what's happening with the Supreme Court and all of the incredible cases. We want to break it down here at the Sara Carter Show. Thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, as always.
Let's talk about this. I mean, I want to start out with the Chevron case first. And I think this is so important because this basically took away a 40-year precedent that had been set up that gave federal regulators basically all kinds of bureaucratic power over companies, over land. And we could see now that this shift is, I mean, it's going to be so significant. It's not just about this case in particular, but when we're hearing experts and legal analysts like you talking about it, it basically is going to take away that deference to these federal regulators, saying that because they're the experts on whatever the environment, that they can make any laws that they want. Now they're not able to do that anymore.
Yeah, it's really, really significant. And this is something that conservatives have fought for a long time. And just not provide a history lesson, but to go back that, look, I mean, going back to the beginnings of Marxism, to the beginning of the progressive movement in the early 20th century, there's always been this notion by the left and the far left that if they could only get the right experts in government, this bureaucratic class, that they will figure out what's best and most efficient for society and what's most equitable. And so that's kind of been the progressive, liberal, fundamental notion for the last 100 years. So back in the 1980s, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a case called Chevron, as you noted, basically created this doctrine that if a government agency has what they call a reasonable interpretation of a statute and they create rules and regulations that are reasonable, then they'll be upheld. And not only that,
wasn't that specifically because of the legislator? So if the legislature left any wiggle room at all in any kind of law, then basically then it would just defer over to these regulatory agencies?
Yeah, but I would argue there wasn't even just a little wiggle room. I mean, there was, and when I was AG, we used to sue, especially the environmental agencies and, the SEC over all these regulations they'd promulgate. And you'd be like, there's nothing in statute that says you can do this. So, for example, when the Obama administration tried to create electrical vehicle mandates, they didn't do it via statute. They did it via these agencies and rulemaking. Same thing was happening with the Biden administration, where there was this great kind of power grab. And in fact, we maybe talk about it in a second, but there's a case right now pending in Texas dealing with the Department of Labor and all these ESG mandates and having companies create ESG scores. And there's nothing in statute that says they can do it. And the district judge in Texas specifically, in upholding the ability of the Biden administration to promulgate
it's
that
really
rule,
the
said,
Obama.
Yeah, said that it was basically that, because and this is the second part of the Chevron, it's not only is it a reasonable interpretation, it's also when in doubt, you give the agency the benefit of the doubt. You defer to the agency. So they would end up tipping the scales versus a company versus an individual. It was basically, was there anything inconsistent in the law? Is it reasonable? And we'll defer to the agency. And so that gave the agencies, the bureaucratic state, a lot of power. And in the Texas ESG case, the judge specifically said, because of Chevron, he's bound to basically defer to the agency. So you saw this massive shift. And even, I think it was last year, the year before, there was a vote in Congress to try to roll back some of the environmental regulations. Even Joe Manchin voted for it. And then President Biden vetoed it. So you literally had the lawmakers trying to pass something to roll back a regulation, and the president vetoed it. So the agency ended up having more power than Congress. And one of the kind of ugly secrets of the growth of the bureaucratic and DC class is what's happened over the last, 40 years since Chevron was decided. is you get Congress passes a law, they fund these agencies, and then the agencies do all sorts of crazy stuff, that, decimates the economy, increases oil prices, energy prices, interferes with small businesses. And then the members of Congress go, oh, it's not our fault. It's the Department of Labor, or the SEC, or, whatever alphabet soup agency. It's their fault. OSHA, it's their fault, not ours. And those agencies say, oh, well, Congress funds us and the court said we can do this. So there was literally no one stopping these agencies. And that's why you saw the growth of this bureaucratic state, especially over the last, since Lyndon Johnson was president, but especially the last 40 years.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember covering stories I'm going to go way back to my old days with Glenn Beck at the Blaze, when we would uncover and we would conduct investigations into overregulation, especially under the Obama administration, where we saw like a revolving door within the EPA, people leaving the Sierra Club, leaving all these environmental nonprofit groups, so to speak, getting positions within the Environmental Protection Agency and other regulatory agencies. And then all of a sudden, farmers would be losing their land, or they'd be losing their cattle because they couldn't actually get their cattle to water, because all of a sudden there was some kind of endangered species that was in that area, and they would make it impossible for farmers or ranchers to utilize their land properly. It was devastating for the American businessman, for the American farmer, for the American rancher. And that's just touching on some of these. What can they do now to try to fight back? Is there anything that they can do, or is the Supreme Court, this decision stands, and now what we're going to see is a rollback from all of these regulations?
Yeah, I think we're going to end up seeing a lot of litigation, I guess, which benefits the lawyers in the short run. But really, the last week or two of the U.S. Supreme Court term was really significant, I think, for, entrepreneurship and rolling back the bureaucratic state, because it's not only this Loper case that overturned Chevron. So that was like one of the big punches.
Right.
So now you don't defer to the agencies. But just last week, there was a decision where the court basically said you can sue an agency over regulation. You have up to 6 years, which is the statute of limitations from when the harm occurs. So in the old days, you had to sue right away while the regulation was being promulgated. Now there's additional time to file a lawsuit. So there's
amazing.
More time to consider the harm that's actually happening to someone. So they're making it easier for people to access the court. And when you do get to the court now, whether you're an individual or a business, they've leveled the scales. So now the bureaucratic state, and whether it's the EPA or OSHA or whoever, they don't have the fingers on the scale or the brick on the scale tilting it one way. Now it's even. And judges are going to have to do what they're supposed to be doing, and that's judging, making judicial decisions, and not just deferring to federal bureaucrats.
Let me ask you this. What about, Trump versus the United States? Because this is all about these overbloated bureaucracies. We've talked about weaponization of our court system. President Trump brings that up quite frequently with good reason, because we have seen the courts being weaponized against him because he's as a political opponent of the Biden administration. We know that Hillary Clinton did the same thing. So we're seeing the courts being weaponized as well. But right now with this case, Trump versus the United States, I mean, they basically said, he has presidential immunity, which is something that I'm not a lawyer, but I argued that from the very beginning. I believed that to be the case. Although this was split a little bit in our Supreme Court. I mean, what does this do to Jack Smith's case? I mean, is it over for him?
Well, the short answer is yes. I think this really decimates and really makes it nearly impossible for Jack Smith to prosecute the case. Let me just say this. Let me take a step back. You know this, but in case some of your listeners don't, I was a federal prosecutor before I became AG. I was a gang prosecutor. I've literally handled thousands of criminal cases during the course of my career. I've argued at the U.S. Supreme Court numerous times. And the role of a prosecutor is to do justice. It's not to throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. And in fact, I've literally had conversations with former President Trump about this, even after the 2020 election, about prosecuting and whether there should or shouldn't be prosecutions. And this was before he was indicted. I said, we need to be careful with the justice system and weaponizing it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times as conservatives, we tend to believe in institutions, and we sit there and we say, we're not going to use the power of the government to go after our enemies. And then The left, meanwhile, even during the last debate, Joe Biden said, oh my gosh, if Donald Trump's elected, he's going to, go after his enemies and he's going to prosecute them. And of course, I couldn't help but laugh saying, wait a minute, the only people that are going after their enemies is the Democrats. And you have President Trump being prosecuted in multiple venues by Democrats. During the Obama administration, you had reporters being bugged. You had the fake dossier where the leading presidential candidate was being bugged by the federal government. You had agencies like the IRS going after conservative nonprofits. So
they destroyed people's lives. People's lives. Carter Page's life was destroyed. He was outed. His work in Russia, everything that he did, even though the CIA had told the FBI, look, leave him alone. He's a good guy. We're getting information from him. Please just leave him alone. They did not. They utilized the system and weaponized it against everybody that was around Trump.
Yeah, so unfortunately, but it's not just him. I mean, I think it's just conservatives in general. And there's a lot of projection that goes on with the Democratic Party. So when you hear them talking about, oh my gosh, they're going to persecute political opponents. Oh my gosh, they're going to, unleash the federal government on their enemies. Oh my gosh, they're going to go after the media. Those are actually all things the Democrats and the liberals are doing. It's not what Republicans and even President Trump did when he was president. For all the shouts of lock her up and everything else, guess who never was prosecuted for anything? For destroying the server, for having thousands of classified emails? Hillary Clinton. I mean, so it really is the height of hypocrisy for Joe Biden, the big guy, for him to talk about, people being prosecuted when thus far, the only person that's been prosecuted in multiple venues is the president. So this is a long way to go to answer your question. What the Supreme Court did was entirely consistent with the U.S. Constitution. And so for all these people wringing their hands saying, oh my gosh, the Supreme Court being political.
Wait, I want to show you a clip. And then I want you to respond to it, because there are so many on the left that are wringing their hands, and they have turned it up to 11 in response to this ruling. President Biden gave a speech condemning the decision here, and here's a little of that.
The presidency is the most powerful office in the world. It's an office that not only tests your judgment, perhaps even more importantly, it's an office that tests your character. Because you not only face moments when you need the courage to exercise the full power of the presidency, you also face moments where you need the wisdom to respect the limits of the power of the office of the presidency. This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States.
Okay, is President Trump a king? I mean, I guess Biden's a king. I don't know. What is going on here?
Well,
I can't understand him, though. But
I guess I would say two things. One is the person that actually should be most relieved by this decision is Joe Biden, because I think his whole administration has been defined by high crimes and misdemeanors. I mean, not only just his son and the kickbacks and the uncle and whatever. So he's actually should be relieved just for the incompetence on the border. As I've said before, incompetence isn't a crime. When you and I have talked about the 2020 election, and, sometimes we can disagree on that, but the reality is, as a result of Joe Biden's failed border policies, people have died in the United States. People are dying. Young girls are being raped. The drug cartels have seized southern control of the border. So Joe Biden should be very happy with this decision, because that means the next administration or some Republican AG can't prosecute him for what he did to destroy our southern border. So he should actually be thankful that there's no criminal liability for your official actions as president. The other thing is, I don't think it should come as any surprise to anybody from the reaction of the left. Anytime that there is a Supreme Court decision, of course the left disagrees with it, because for them, the ends justify the means. They don't care about the old Constitution. And the reality is this decision was tethered, just like some of the other recent decisions that have been quote unquote controversial, in the Constitution. And the Constitution provides the president with certain authorities, certain powers. And the whole point is that what happens in third world countries is when you disagree with someone politically, you go after them through prosecutor's office. You basically, imprison your political opponents. And unfortunately, I think we're starting to see a little bit of that here. And I think that's why the Supreme Court came in and basically said, look, if it's an official act of the president, which the Constitution says he or she can do, then you can't prosecute them for it, because if you do, you're going to end up down this rabbit hole where every time there's a change in administration, a bunch of people, not just the president, but aides, staff, are going to end up being arrested and prosecuted, and it's going to deter anyone from wanting to serve in government, except for people on the far left that control all the agencies that are going to end up prosecuting people.
Well, this is what's quite frightening to most Americans, Mark, and it's the reason why I'm so glad you're on the show today. I talk to people every single day, whether it's, at the rally I was at in Virginia for President Trump right after, that incredible debate that we saw. I think that opened everybody's eyes up around the globe as to how bad the situation is right now with President Biden and his deterioration, both mentally and physically. But the biggest fear that most Americans have right now is this weaponization of the bureaucracy, right? The power that the bureaucracy has over the American people, and the weaponization not only of the courts, but of law enforcement and other venues. For example, when we saw the stories coming out that, the FBI was looking at, people that went to Latin Mass as being potential domestic terrorists, like we've got to watch those people that go to Latin Mass, or like my husband, who's a military veteran, that, wow, military veterans could potentially pose a major problem for us. Or somebody like me who openly supported President Trump and is an America First person, it could potentially be an extremist. These are very terrifying issues to Americans that are watching their government shift to something that they are not familiar with at all. I mean, this appears to be more banana republic, more old, Russian style politics, Soviet style politics, utilizing the government to strike fear into the hearts of people. Now, are there domestic terrorists? Yes. I'm not saying there aren't bad people. Sure, there probably are bad people. But to take entire groups of Americans and to designate them as a potential problem, then leak it to like this joke of the New York Times or the Washington Post in order to strike fear into the hearts of Americans before the election, to me, that's not only election interference, that's some type of, extremist Stalin tactic to keep the public quiet so that they don't stand up and don't speak up against malfeasance in the government.
A couple things. First of all, and I know your background, you don't mind, I'm a first-generation American. My parents lived through communism in the former Yugoslavia, lived through World War II. And so I was always brought up with a real healthy distrust of centralized authority in government, skeptical, kind of that libertarian streak. And so one of the things that I learned from a very young age is not only that any government that's big enough to give you everything is big enough to take it all away, and that the left wants to create this dependency on government. But one of the things that I remind my Democratic or leftist friends is that ultimately every revolution eats its own, because you will never be sufficiently left enough for it. That's why Robespierre ended up dying during the French Revolution. That's why Trotsky ended up dying in Mexico. And so inevitably, you will never be sufficiently leftist enough. So what I would tell, people that in the middle or people on the left is that they may be coming after conservatives, or as you said, people attending Latin Mass, or people that, care so much about this country, they protest against Joe Biden or whatever. They may be going after those people today, but tomorrow it's going to be, the people that run small businesses and in corporate America. So you're already starting to see this demonization. So this is part of the left strategy, right? Define, demonize, destroy. So what they've done is they've defined, and now they're demonizing, and now they're destroying people on, the conservative side of the spectrum. But you're already starting to see the demonization of capitalism and people that create wealth in this country, and property rights. We see this erosion of property rights throughout our country. And so, eventually the left will come for you too. It doesn't matter who you are. Eventually the revolution will eat you.
And I wish that people understood that, but I'm afraid that so many in their hate and they have Trump derangement syndrome and their feelings about what the world should be like under this new ideological roadmap that professors basically set out for students while I think America was asleep. This new kind of bizarre Marxist fascist twist on everything, that they don't really see that. The reason I brought that up was, America First Legal, they had a press release where they showed that Brennan Clapper Intel Committee, which now has been disbanded, but admitted the existence of a deep state that works quietly to make democracy work in the face of domestic terrorism threats, or in their eyes, supporters of the former president. And I'm going to read this to you because I think this is just astonishing to me. During the September meeting, the group revealed its true colors in a discussion about the administration, DT, Donald Trump's strategy, and the DHS role in countering domestic terrorism, against the backdrop of claiming that domestic terrorism only comes from supporters of former President Trump. The group revealed the existence and mindset of the deep state. They said essentially they are willing to thwart the will of the American people through their elected representatives. That's what they are saying about us. They put in that group, they said that there is a political backdrop to all of this. It seems that most of the domestic terrorism threat now comes from supporters of the former president. This is from their document. It is not like you want a political advantage, but people have attacked the government and its institutions for the last 6 years. How do you appeal to people and say this is wrong for anyone to do so? How do we rebuild faith in the federal government? This seems to be a White House problem. Each agency cannot defend itself. It goes on to say that, as I suggested, that those who attend Latin Mass, military, religious, and political supporters are the problem and should be monitored. Where does our government get off saying that we need to be monitored because we're speaking? Isn't that the American way? Aren't we supposed to be in charge? It's not our government. Isn't we the people that are supposed to be in charge?
Yeah, they've obviously forgotten that, and it's one of the things, kind of circling back even to the Loper case dealing with overturning Chevron.
Right.
The reason why that was so significant, I think, why the left was wringing their hands, is because it undermined the bureaucratic state and this notion that these federal agencies should have all this power and tell us how to live our lives. Look, at the end of the day, and I know you and I have talked about this before, one of my favorite authors is a guy named Milovan Djilas, and he was the former vice president of Yugoslavia. It was a communist country. He was Tito, who was the former president, like his right-hand guy. And Djilas wrote a book. He ended up going to prison for 7 years. He was expelled from the Communist Party, and his book is called The New Class. His first book was called The New Class, and it was all about the bureaucratic state. Even in communist countries, he became disillusioned with communism because he said this bureaucratic state ends up arising in any society, whether it's capitalist or communist, and they think they know what's best. They get all the perks. They get to go to the best schools. They control the levers of power, and you have to know them in order to get ahead in society. And the book was written in the 1950s, but I think it's eerily similar to what's going on in the United States today, where if you're a big business, you got to hire a K Street lobbyist, or you got to hire a lawyer in order to navigate the IRS regulations, or have somebody lobbying for you in front of the EPA or whatever it is. And I've spoken about this for years, not to regress too much, but when I chaired, when Governor Brewer was governor here, 10, 12 years ago, I chaired a commission on privatization and efficiency. And one of the recommendations we made is getting rid of civil service protections for government employees, because it was impossible to fire government employees. And she did it. She fought it. She ended up succeeding in that. And I've said for years that what needs to happen, if you want to drain the swamp, if you want to clean out DC, the number one thing you need to do is get rid of all these civil service protections. Because what the left has done, they've masterminded. Every time at the end of the administration, and you alluded to this earlier, is whether it's EPA or, whatever, name your alphabet soup agency.
ATF,
yes, they stick
Security and
people
Exchange Commission, whoever.
They stick these people into career slots, and then they can't be fired. And I know that a former colleague of mine, when he was EPA director, from day one, he was being undermined, and his own spokesperson, he was given a speech, questioning, global warming and, the impact and, on society. And his own spokespeople were issuing statements saying that he was wrong and didn't know what he was talking about. So he couldn't even control the people that were reporting directly to him in the agency. And I just think that's emblematic. And I know that one of my friends who's just retired being an FBI agent, he's lament to me over coffee how the FBI now, instead of cracking down on the cartels, they're being sent down to investigate Border Patrol agents that are for excessive use of force or counting how many latrines and making sure they have enough, and it's crazy. And he was just talking about the priorities. And it's one of the things, and I know.
Wait, let's stop right there. I got to stop right there because we're going to focus on that one for just a second, because that pisses me off. And I know exactly what you're talking about. Investigating Border Patrol agents that hands are tied behind their backs. They can't even do their jobs. They're terrified that they're going to be letting terrorists into this country and that they probably already have. Talk about that, because this is really where everything kind of what do you call it? It's where the rubber meets the road. It's this is the reason why the morale is so low with our Border Patrol agents. This is the reason why our law enforcement officials are throwing up their hands. They don't even want to go to work anymore, because victims do not get the kind of treatment that the criminals do from DAs, from district attorneys, who basically exalt the criminal and destroy the victim, or destroy the law enforcement guy and let the criminals run free across the border.
Yeah, it really is. There's this great contradiction, because you look at what's happening, for example, with President Trump and those prosecutions, and I would tell the folks out there on the left that, look, the criminal justice system is about protecting individual rights. And so it's so funny that the left wants to coddle. They don't want to prosecute people for attacking federal courthouses or burning down police stations in Seattle or whatever. But then they want to prosecute President Trump under some weird legal theory about some payment made to an adult film actress years ago. It's so mind-boggling that they think that's the crime of the century, yet people that literally are tearing down and burning institutions shouldn't be prosecuted because they're just expressing their frustration and anger.
Right.
And it's because it's a leftist mentality. And then going back to law enforcement, how demoralized they are. Look, what's happened is you get the the Biden administration, they put people in charge, and, people that are, on the ground, the agents working, or the police officers working hard every day, it's demoralizing when everything you do is being second guessed, it's being questioned. You get, liberal DAs in New York or liberal AGs in New York that end up investigating and prosecuting police officers every time there's a use of force. Even when, for example, I know there's a recent shooting in New York. I don't know a lot about it, but I did hear, and the left was making a big deal of, he had a replica Glock gun. It was really a BB gun. It wasn't a real gun. And it's wait a minute, if you're a police officer making a split-second decision, are you supposed to wait till he shoots you with the BB gun to figure out if it's a 9mm or a BB gun? It's just so mind-boggling to me that every benefit of the doubt on the left goes to these violent criminals. They allowed the cartels to seize control of our southern border. And when something does happen, it seems like the people that are breaking the law end up getting the benefit of the doubt, especially at the southern border. And I know, just as another quick anecdote, I was there. Someone I know that's an executive in the healthcare industry was lamenting to me just a few weeks ago that in the hospital in Yuma down there, that what happens is, if someone gets injured illegally crossing or entering our country, they break a leg or break a rib or something, they end up taking them to the hospital, and DHS will pay for 2 days of medical care. The problem is these people are staying for 3 and 4 weeks, and so the hospital is losing millions of dollars, and no one seems to care. So there's these human costs in fentanyl deaths, and the cartel seizing control, and criminals, raping and killing our citizens. So there's all these costs we see directly involved with what's going on at the border. But then there's indirect costs where you have agents that are demoralized, people that don't want to work in law enforcement because they're being demonized, because they're being second guessed and investigated. And then you have these hospitals and doctors having to absorb these costs, which of course ends up leading to higher costs for us. And I just think, I'm sorry, the people, even watching the debate the other night, people are stupid. Like I said, I'm very proud to be a first generation American. There's nothing inherently wrong with immigration, but you have to do it the right way. And I can't tell you how many of my mom's 89 now. Like I said, she's lived through World War II and communism, and she has a bunch of her old Bubba friends that, are in their late 80s, early 90s. And every one of them tells the same story about, when I came to this country, no one flew me out to see my cousin. No one gave me, free Visa cards with $1,000. No one gave me free healthcare. I mean, my mom talks about working, having to work 2 jobs. And, when I went to school, I was forced to learn English. I mean, I spoke Serbo-Croatian. So it's like, even generationally, it's different because people think there's something fundamentally wrong with so many people coming in, breaking the law, not getting all these benefits, and then just really not being assimilating.
Yeah, and they're not only not assimilating, but we know that our adversaries are taking advantage of this open border policy that's literally destroying the fabric of our nation. And they're just allowing, just think about it, allowing everyone and anyone in, dumping out their prisons. They could be dumping out their insane asylums. We have 2 men who operated together to rape a young 12-year-old girl, Jocelyn Nungari. They raped her and tortured her for about 2 hours before they sadistically killed her and then left her body in a bayou 2 hours from my home, 2.5 hours from my home. I have an 11-year-old daughter. And I told someone the other day, I said, you know what, Mark, I told them, these guys, this isn't their first rodeo. These men left Venezuela and they probably left a death trail all the way to the United States. You don't just walk into the United States and within 30 days say, hey, you know what, it'll be fun. Let's just find a 12-year-old and let's do whatever we want to her. So we have allowed monsters into our nation. I think the American people are waking up, but unfortunately we don't have our news agencies are failing us miserably. Our investigative journalists, to a large extent, thank God for independent journalism. Thank God for some news agencies. I think Fox is doing a good job covering the border, but a lot of people aren't. But I did receive an email, and I wanted to talk to you about this. I got it this morning only because I was looking at Lara Loomer's her posts, and she had posted an email that was actually sent to her by the New York Times. Saying that they were going to write a story and include her in it about Mar-a-Lago. And I was kind of giggling like, wow, these people just never stop. They never stop. They just have to continue to target President Trump. I wonder who's behind it. But as I was laughing about that, I thought, you know what, I better check my emails. So I did. And lo and behold, I received the exact same email. It's almost a carbon copy, almost. And I will read it to you. We're working on a story about Mar-a-Lago. We are reaching out to let you know that you will be included in a group of people who have 3 points. Attended at least 3 events on the property since Donald Trump left the White House. I didn't know that was illegal or wrong. Questioned the results of the 2020 election. I would like to know what comments they have of me actually questioning results of the election, where those are. I don't know where they are. Alleged, I may question election integrity and say we need to do more about that, but I thought that was legal. Alleged January 6th was a federal plot or played down its seriousness. I've never said it was a federal plot, but I have played down its seriousness. I've said it's certainly not like the Civil War, where America lost over 500,000 people fighting on both sides. Please let us know if you believe any of these details to be incorrect. I was never that kind of journalist. But when I was an investigative journalist, if I had a story I was writing, I would call you. I would talk to you about it. I would get your side of the story. I would try to figure out what was going on here. And I would know you. I wouldn't just randomly include you in some kind of hit piece that they're writing that's targeting President Trump, obviously. I mean, I feel a little bit honored to be in that group right now because I can't stand the New York Times. But I believe this could also be a setup, that they're trying to set people up.
There's a lot to unpack there. Let me begin first with what I think is an important anecdote comment. So the other night, you mentioned Biden's terrible debate performance, and this is relevant to the New York Times, so hear me out on this. So I couldn't help but think, because I'm a student of history, that in 1968, when Walter Cronkite, who was quote unquote America's most trusted newsman, he came back from Vietnam and he basically did his broadcast. He said, "What the hell is going on?" And like was very critical of the war and the way it's being conducted. And Lyndon Johnson famously told his aides, "If I've lost Walter Cronkite, I've lost middle America." Now, it took a couple weeks, but then Lyndon Johnson famously went on the air a couple weeks later and said he will not seek nor will he accept his party's nomination for president. And I keep thinking when the New York Times wrote that editorial and the Chicago paper, the Atlanta paper, saying that Joe Biden should step down, I think it's a Walter Cronkite moment. And, everything seems, in history, sometimes, everything seems so quick and sudden. But I think that what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks, just like what happened with after Walter Cronkite's broadcast, that it took Johnson a few weeks to finally say he wasn't going to run for president. I think that's what we're seeing now, that the people behind the scenes are pushing Biden to step down. And the fact that the New York Times said that publicly, I think speaks volumes, because here's the reality.
Right.
We on the right, we always talk about like, oh, don't believe the New York Times, don't believe the Washington Post, it's lefty propaganda, which it is. But the problem is that they set a narrative that then some local papers pick up on, the AP picks up on, and other people pick up on, and then it becomes part of the bloodstream, and even subconsciously, people start believing it because if you say it enough, it happens to be true. And I think the media, the mainstream media or legacy media, whatever you want to call it, they're so disingenuous. I know even last year when there was bogus BS bar complaints filed against me, which have all been dismissed now, related to what I said or didn't say regarding the 2020 election. Same thing. They call you on a Tuesday night at like 5 p.m. Arizona time. They say, "Hey, we're running this story. We need you to make a comment within a half an hour of like some major story." And then what happens though, it gets to the media, it gets out there, then local media picks it up, and then everyone starts talking about local radio. And, the truth, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth puts on its tennis shoes. And meanwhile, they've set a narrative. So that's one of the things I tell people on the right is that, or the conservatives, whatever, term you want to use, is that the legacy media, that mainstream media, we may not read it. We may want to not read it. We think it's garbage. But what happens is, the problem is the policymakers read it, and the people on the national networks read it, and the people in the local media read it. And the next thing you know, it has a contagion effect. And that's why it's important for us to push back.
Are they trying to silence us? Are they? Yeah. Are they trying to silence us? Are they trying to eliminate anybody who stands up to this so-called establishment? And this left radical ideological left that has taken control of our bureaucracies and I guess our esteemed national media outlets. I feel like they're just trying to silence us, eliminate us, destroy us, whatever they can do to do this. And they're going to try to do this before November. I think they're scared. Does it show their desperation?
No, it absolutely does. But here's what the thing. Look, this neo-Marxism crept into our universities in the 60s and 70s. Then it crept into our, elementary and, high schools and, the 90s. And so the flowers are now blooming that the left planted. And a lot of people that are even Democrats don't understand that fundamentally the Democratic Party has shifted so far to the left. All these notions about the bureaucratic state and, attacking your enemies and suppressing dissent. This is all neo-Marxism. They want to destroy the government. The graduated income tax, getting rid of religion, destroying the nuclear family. This is all stuff Marx wrote about. It's in the Communist Manifesto, and it's all manifesting itself in different ways. And I think people on the left, the Democrats, they don't even realize it, that they become pawns of the new Marxists, the neo-Marxists. And so I think it's really troubling because, once again, not to make this about me, but when we talk about lawfare, we know about the case against President Trump, but there's a bunch of people. I had left-wing groups filed bar complaints against me. And you remember, I was getting, criticized by people on the right. I didn't get Donald Trump's endorsement, even though I still talked to him because he didn't think I did enough on the election, even though I did Brnovich v. DNC at the U.S. Supreme Court. And I pointed out some of the problems with our system, including lack of chain of custody ballots. But I said incompetence isn't a crime. But because I didn't go far enough in dismissing, whatever, they filed bar complaints, not only against me, but lawyers in our office. And so I had, people that are, younger lawyers that are worried about their future. And I just remember thinking to myself, because one of the lawyers said to me, they're like, "Hey, Mark, you're in your 50s. You've got this like great background career, like you'll be fine. But, younger lawyers are worried that like, oh my God, are they going to get disbarred? Are they going to get suspended? And they can never be judges, or then they can never do this or that. And so it's a form of intimidation, because it's not only about going after people that are conservative or high profile Republicans, it's about going after people that work for them, because then you can intimidate them. And then if no one wants to work in a Republican administration, then you end up with the bureaucratic class running the show again. And that's ultimately what they want. They want the experts, what they think are the experts, to be in charge.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think we're going to have to watch how everything unfolds. And especially when that story comes out on Friday, I'll be very interested to see what this reporter, whom I've never met, never spoken to ever, what she'll have to say about me. But one of the last questions I have for you right now, and I want to bring you back on again real soon, because there's so much to unpack. But will Biden be switched out? Because right now, earlier today, the New York Times reporter, Katie Rogers, wrote, and going from the left, because this is important, like you said, they do know, this is where their sources are on the left. So President Biden has told a key ally that he knows he may not be able to salvage his candidacy if he cannot convince the public in the coming days that he is up for the job after a disastrous debate performance last week. So I think that they're kind of setting the stage. And they say that VP Harris is already looking at potential VP picks. What do you think's going on here? Do you think this is going to be their move? As an educated guess, do you think that they're going to have President Biden step down?
Well, I will tell you this, not to say I told you so. We can go find the clip. When I was on Nigel Farage and his Reform Party, there's an election that he's surging at in the UK right now. When I was on his show last year, I said, here's my guaranteed airtight prediction. Joe Biden will not be the Democratic nominee, and I think they'll replace him at the convention. And so I said the last year, I still stand by that. And here's why. Because the left loves power, right? For the last 8 years, they've created this narrative that, in their minds, they've created this narrative that Donald Trump is a danger to democracy. He's a fascist. He's going to lock people up. They've convinced themselves of that, right? And so if you really believe that, and you're a Democrat, and you look at the polling numbers and you look at that debate performance, you're like, oh my goodness, not only is Joe Biden going to lose, but you can see like Virginia's in play now. Maine. It's not only about swing states like Arizona and Georgia. You could have a massive landslide that not only does Trump win, but then there's Senate seats get picked up, and then you also have House seats that get picked up. And if you're a lefty, that is the worst nightmare in the world, because then it's like, well, wait a minute. Because usually when Republicans win, like Ronald Reagan wins, the Democrats say, oh, it's not because they like his policies. It's because he's a nice guy and he's an actor. And they kind of like, they damn you with faint praise. And, when they win, when they squeak out a win, even Bill Clinton doesn't get a majority. He only gets like 43%. It's like, see, America's a progressive country. They want, and they lurch to the left. So in their minds, they cannot handle Joe Biden running and getting swamped like a tidal wave election with Biden losing House seats, Senate seats. They can't tolerate that, because that'll undermine everything they've said. And quite frankly, it's attacking all their left-wing principles. So I think they will replace him. I think they're in the process of that right now. There's probably a week where they're doing their final stuff. They're probably going to have Biden. I think he's going to do a sit down with George Stephanopoulos, which will be another softball interview. But I think that's really like the test. They're trying to figure out okay, because look, it's sad. I had one of my friends from Europe call me that watched the debate and said, I can't they remove it's like embarrassing for the United States. It really is. If you saw it objectively, it's embarrassing.
If there was ever reason for the 25th, it's now.
Amendment.
If there was ever yes.
Right. It really, we're a mockery. And and so the left, the Democrats have to see that as well. They have to know that on some level. And that's why, as I said, it's the Walter Cronkite moment. The fact that the New York Times, the fact that the biggest paper in Chicago, the biggest paper in Atlanta, Georgia, are calling for him to step down. Those are like the flares in the night before the battle starts, right? They're illuminating the battlefield. Mm-hmm. And so right now, I think what you're going to see is this final push, kind of almost putting it on Joe Biden to say, can you salvage this? Can you string from 10 to 4 and more than one day and taking 2 days off? Can you pull it together? And I think the answer we all know is no. And also the fact that you're seeing so many stories now about Jill Biden and, people are attacking her and criticizing her. I think that they're trying to put pressure on her because she loves being in the spotlight. And they're basically sending the message look, you're going to ruin your legacy and his
too.
legacy. Yeah. Unless you, this is what I said, this is what the left does. They will destroy you. Eventually, every revolution, when they're done with you, they will discard you. And they are done with Joe Biden. He serves them no purpose. And in fact, now he is blocking their path, what they think is to victory.
Who do you think they could replace him with? I mean, we're hearing different rumors, but I mean, what do you think? And I always tell the right, I say, and I made this a statement at a speech that I just recently gave. I said, look, do not underestimate your opponent. Do not underestimate the enemy, because they have had contingency plans, for a while now. So just everybody's got to get out there and vote. Do not underestimate what can happen from here on out, even after this debate. But who do you think they'll replace him with? Michelle Obama? Oprah? I have no idea. What's going to happen? What's going to happen, Mark?
Look, I mean, I think, and this is obviously, I did a tweet. In fact, I think you retweeted my tweet when I made the comment about like forcing Justice Sotomayor out and putting Kamala Harris on the state Supreme Court, or U.S. Supreme Court, excuse me, and then having somebody else come in. Because, of course, the left is all about identity politics. And if Joe Biden does do a Lyndon Johnson and say he's not going to run for president, then one, it would naturally be the vice president. That'd be the natural choice. And two, the fact that she's a female and African-American, I think that there's no way you can pass her over unless you find like a spot on the Supreme Court for her. And so some of my conservative friends who are very smart lawyers, I know that people you would know if I dropped their names, like texted me after I sent that tweet out, and they're like, "Oh, you're so wrong because it requires, because of the filibuster, it's going to require a supermajority to get anyone appointed to the Supreme Court." And I said, if you don't think like when Harry Reid was in charge and they broke the rules for appellate judges and district judges, the left's going to do whatever they can, right, to hold on to power, because it's all about holding on to power by any means necessary. And so I think that if they have to, they'll do that. But I also think, once again, as someone who's won twice statewide in a swing state being underfunded, is that you can clearly see there has been an effort by the left, by the Democrats, especially the last week and a half, 2 weeks, to get Kamala Harris out there more, like trying to highlight. In fact, I saw someone, some tweet, someone on the left was posting about how she's a former prosecutor and all this stuff. Yeah, so they're trying to, they're really trying to push her. And I think that's part of the 1-2 punch of like, trying to give Biden one last chance and slowly talk him out of doing it, and promoting Kamala and saying, oh, well, she can win. And, and the left really thinks that almost anyone other than Joe Biden could beat Donald Trump. So I think they will push for a Kamala Harris, or maybe, you hear the stuff about like Whitmer in Michigan, if there's an open convention.
Yes, I did hear that.
Gavin Newsom, I've said he's a the Democrats play identity politics, but Gavin Newsom is, when he debated Ron DeSantis, he doubled down on every hardcore lefty thing. And I think he did that because he was trying to establish his bona fides with the base of the party. And, he's got money and good looks and connections to Nancy Pelosi. So anybody with that, in their back pocket is going to be formidable if there's an open convention. So I think it's going to happen. And what I started to say is one of my, like I said, my friend's a prominent national conservative, had like email or texted me after I sent that tweet out. He said, not only about you're wrong about the Supreme Court because the filibuster, which I disagreed with. He said, and there's stories that said, oh, well, they can't replace Biden on the ballot in Wisconsin and some other states, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you think the left is going to play by the rules? You have a Democratic Supreme Court in Wisconsin.
Right.
You don't think, I saw this, like people don't understand like what goes on. We talk about lawfare and litigation. Like when I was AG, the left would file lawsuits. For example, the current Secretary of State, who's the court at the time, tried to send mail-in ballots to everyone, whether they requested them or not. I remember our office went to court on a Friday and stopped it. So we don't get a lot of credit for this stuff. When the Democrats tried to extend voter registration period here, we had to go to federal court. We stopped it, but the judge gave them an extra 10 days, the federal, or 7 days, 10, whatever. In Pennsylvania, they extended the period the curing period when you could take absentee ballots. So the left does this all the time, where they find a friendly judge and they file a lawsuit saying, oh, we need to do this in order to protect democracy, whatever. And then some sympathetic judge changes the rules, even if it's for a window, like a week or 2 weeks. And meanwhile, we're appealing to the Court of Appeals or state Supreme Court or U.S. Supreme Court. But it gives them that time.
Yeah, and then it takes like another year for it to get reversed or to get changed. We saw that in Wisconsin. We saw that in Pennsylvania, just like you said.
Yeah, so if you think that because there's a statute in Wisconsin that says that you have to be in by June, whatever, in order to be on the ballot in November, I think they will find a way to get around that, especially with the court that's a Democratic state Supreme Court there. They'll get around it. So the point is that I think that the legal roadblocks the left is going through right now, figure out, okay, how do we do this? How do we make sure he's on the ballot, or she, whoever it is on the ballot in these other states? And then you end up with, I think that right now, if you're a betting person, I think there's the odds would be that it's Kamala Harris, but I would say that's not for sure, because I think there's a lot of polling and a lot of stuff going on in the background, figuring out if her negatives are even higher than Biden's or not. And that's the big debate the Democrats are having behind the scenes.
Well, I got to tell you, based on the folks that I talk to, based on the people that I think, whether they're independent Democrats or Republicans, and I'm just doing my own random survey from people that I know, Kamala Harris, she does not poll well either. So I think they are going to have to come up with something, and they know it. I think that the American people have their eyes wide open. And if they attempt to do anything that is, I would say, that is not open before the public, if they try to sneak their way around this, if they try to play games with the American people, I think that it's going to be one of the biggest mistakes they could make, because they are exposed now. They're exposed, like they're standing there naked, like the emperor has no clothes, and it doesn't. And he's standing there naked before the American people. And I think the American people can see what has happened to us and our nation since 2015 on, Mark, since 2015 on, and especially under this administration in the last 4 years. Thanks so much for being a part of the show.
Can I add one thing? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to get to rebuttal.
Go right ahead.
Let me just say, I think really, really important point. Look, when I was in office, I never did polling. I really didn't. I'd always say, I talked to bartenders and waitresses and people at the grocery store, and your neighbors when you're walking the dog, and you get a good feel, and you get a feel for what's going on in society. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a feel. If you talk to, I'll call it normal, hardworking people, so whether they're bartender, waiter, there's a real sense and angst that you play by the rules. And you can't afford a house. You can't afford to send your kids to college anymore. Groceries are through the roof. And what I'm saying is, I just got back from Europe with my wife, and we were there for a week, and you can sense it. Like, you go to the UK, like Nigel Farage of the Reform Party is surging. In France, Le Pen and that party surging. And what do they have in common? It's just like Donald Trump. You saw this last year in Italy, where in the Western world, people are sick and tired of all this illegal immigration, all these, bureaucratic class rising up, and all these benefits going to people that are unwilling to be productive members of society. And so I think people have had it. And, I've always said the American dream is about being able to, afford to own something, like own a house or start a business, and to be able to make sure your kids have a better life than you. And that, whether that's going to college or, having them start a business or doing what they love, that's what the American dream is all about. Owning a piece of the American pie and having your kids or having a better life than you did. And I think what's happening all over the Western world is that slipping away. It's you work hard, and yet it's harder to pay for groceries. You work hard, you go to the gas station, and you're like, oh my God, it's $100. Oh, and I will say, I have an SUV, and I know lefties have criticized me for that, but you go fill up your truck, and it's $100 now. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, everything is so expensive. And then you combine with that this notion that, people that are breaking the law, entering the country illegally, are getting Visa to gift cards, staying in 4- and 5-star hotels, and there's no consequences for breaking the law. And then we see the surge in fentanyl deaths and the violent deaths you were talking about earlier, people being raped and killed. Everywhere all over the world, people are like, this is not right. This is not Western civilization. And so I think that you're seeing this revolt, so to speak, all over the world. But it's not a lefty revolt. It's actually a rule of law, libertarian/conservative revolt that's happening.
Right. A common sense revolt where families are like, hey, we've had enough of this, and we're going to get our countries back. We're going to get our sovereignty back. We're going to follow rule of law, and we're not going to allow criminals to roll over us anymore. And that means criminals, whether that's on the streets or in the government. Thank you so much, Mark. I couldn't have said that better myself. I'm so happy you were on the show. I look forward to having you back on. And, I think like what you said, it's just, we've got to keep up the fight. We've got to do what's right. We got to get out there, speak up, speak out. I tell people all the time when you're listening to the show, the most important thing I say is you can't be afraid. Do not be afraid to speak up and speak out. Say your piece. We live in the United States of America. You're the one that's in charge, not the government. Let them know that by going to the ballot box and voting for the best person in November, the person that's going to take your nation out of this rut. Thank you, Mark. Hey, folks, I love MyPillow. I love companies that care about the American worker and the American people. And Mike Lindell's company is one of those companies and a great sponsor of the Sara Carter Show. I mean, there isn't a dog in my house, and we've got 4 that doesn't sleep on a MyPillow doggy bed. In fact, I think I got one of them behind me right now. Hey, Astro, come here. This is my newest pal, and he loves his MyPillow doggy bed. Yes, he's a great lab, sometimes a little bit of a pain. But when Mike Lindell first launched MyPillow, it was solely a solution for one problem. But with the dedication of his team, they've expanded their offerings to include hundreds of products and to spread the word that they will not be part of a cancel culture. They are hosting a $25 extravaganza going on now. Here's their current offer. If you use promo code Carter, CARTER, at mypillow.com to get the sale price and free shipping on your order over $75. Here's some of the products that are available for $25. 2-pack MyPillow sandals, luxurious 6-pack towel sets, and brand new 4-pack dish towels, small dog beds, beach towels, and other savings with promo code Carter. The Giza Dream bed sheets right now, queen size only $59.98 with promo code, 60% off my slippers, which everyone in my house has, and mattress toppers as low as $99.99. Go to mypillow.com or call 1-800-685-7221 today to get in on the $25 extravaganza today. Be sure to use code Carter to get the sale price and free shipping on your order over $75. Call 1-800-685-7221 or go to mypillow.com. Promo code Carter. Again, mypillow.com, promo code Carter. Thank you so much, Mark, for coming on the Sara Carter Show. If you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, give us a like and a follow and send us to a friend if you like the show. Please make sure you're subscribed to the Sara Carter Show on your favorite podcast app. We really appreciate it. Follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, on X at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our nation. And God bless the great state of Texas.